Well, hello! More excitement! Another new quad has arrived, and this is the first time I've ever got a bind and fly to... is it a 210? Yeah, it's a 210. Normally I get the sort of bind and fly micros. This is very exciting, and in fact it's a larger one. So let's see what it can do, and let's see what's in the box. So this came from Gearbest. Really quite nice packing actually. Came in a very solid outer cardboard box, which didn't look like it could get crushed. And then here inside a lot of bubble wrap is the BFight 210, which is another wonderfully gorgeous looking quad. It looks put together really nicely. 4mm carbon arms, really strong. These are 2205 2300 kV motors. There should be an all-in-one 30 amp ESC board. You've obviously got a flight controller, which is an Omnibus F3 Pro apparently. There is a VTX on board obviously, and a little receiver. The little receiver looks like a weak point. It looks like one of these little compatible ones you run in D8 mode, and it's got this tiddly little antenna there. Lovely looking lens on that camera. And this is interesting as well. So at the moment it's got the little linear dipole antenna plugged into the VTX at the back here. But if we look in the bag of bits you get with it, which is here, you also get one of these. This is a little, it's called an Mmc X Adapter. So you can unplug this one, plug this in, and then this goes up through that hole. And this is an RPSMA. So you can put a skew on there or something, which is interesting. Also in here they give you a couple of cable ties, a bit of shrink wrap to keep it upright, and these battery straps. These are a little bit, I don't like these battery straps too much because they're not as grippy as your normal ones you sort of thread through and pull back. Also in the box, 2 sets of gem fan props. These are 51-52, quite a high pitch on those ones, 3-bladed ones, and some instructions. What I didn't know about this is it's actually made by AuroraRC, who also did the rather lovely QAV 105, which I reviewed last time, which is really nicely put together. So it'd be nice to see how this does. A couple of interesting things in the manual that I wasn't aware of, where it talks about its VTX. It says apparently you can change it through S-Bus with channel 6, which is a bit of a weird thing. Obviously there's a couple of standards like Emotion RC Tramp and the TBS Smart Audio about how you can change band and power and channels through your OSD. This is a new thing, just putting on perhaps a switch, but yeah, I'll have a look at that. But let's I mean obviously there's not much to do. I have to bind it, I have to put the props on, and then we'll take a look in BetaFlight, see if there's any changes needed. There is, I was thinking I'm going to have to take the top off just to get to the bind button. There's just the corner of the bind button on this little receiver in there. But there's also apparently a little button for the OSD on this camera, so I might just take the top off to have a look anyway. Yeah, let's get the top off and have a quick close-up look and we'll see what's in there. Okay, so we've taken that top plate off and you can see the VTX here, and it indeed does have this S-Bus connection there, so it's going to be a channel will change, well, stuff on it. I'm not exactly sure what, but we'll figure that bit out. There's the little OSD and joystick to configure the camera, which I better do while the top's off at some point. Yeah, this is the little receiver, and the bind button is just there, and I'm not actually sure if it's being squashed by the top plate at the moment. I haven't tried to bind it. It looks a little bit squashed and tricky, but we'll give that a go later. Just here is that socket for the antenna, and these are pretty solid when you actually click them into place. Much better than the UFL. So I'm actually probably going to go with using the linear, just because I had a quick look and I didn't have a suitable skew. I've got a load of right angle ones, but not a straight up one. But yeah, aside from that, it looks fairly tidy. Soldering's not too bad at all. My only slight worry is that receiver kind of squashed in there. It's not the best, but... So I'll see if I can bind it up using that tiny button in there, if it's not already pressed down. We'll go through the OSD on a camera, make sure it's set up nicely, and yeah, we'll put the props on, get it flying. Here's a quick look at the camera OSD, because it's got an interesting thing where you can switch between PAL and NTSC, which I don't remember seeing before very often. And of course I set WDR to on. Okay, with apologies for the carnage on my desk, I of course managed to find a problem. If we power that up, what I was seeing is nothing on the receiver screen, BetaFlight. We got a green light there showing that's bound, that was no problem. But if I connect into BetaFlight, wiggle my sticks, you'll notice nothing's going on with that receiver. But you can also see that we've got these, the receivers coming in here, and we've got lines for ground, 5 volt, S-bus, and then this line here is the S-bus to the VTX, which is supposed to change channel. But if we unplug that, then go back up to the screen, look, it works. So it would seem like this white cable here is having an impact on the S-bus signal, but I don't know why. What I thought is this might be a normal UART, and this is receive, this is transmit, and maybe there was an issue there. But just doing a continuity test on those two, they appear to be linked. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to desolder that one. I'll try sticking it straight on there just to see if there's any difference, but if not, I'm just going to leave it off. It's got a sort of limited usefulness of changing channels within your band. There is a button to use here which you'd need to use to change bands and power anyway, but yeah, pretty weird, but let's try changing that and see if anything happens. Okay, so the short answer to that question of the S-bus connection was I desoldered it from one, I tried it on the other, still same response, so I've unsoldered it and I've heat shrinked the end just in case I find out what the problem is and get it going. So it could be that I had a fault in the VTX or the RX or even the FC, but the only thing I didn't try and do is connect it directly to the RX because I couldn't be bothered to remove all the heat shrink, do some more soldering and test it out just from the basis that, well, it should work as it is, and I didn't care that much to go and investigate it. But I will send this video off and an email to AuroraRC and see if they've got any suggestions about what it might be. So here is the finished article. I've gone with the clear props. I was interested to see if they'd show up as much in the video. I don't expect they'll look any different than sort of a green prop. They'll just be sort of a blur on the side, but oh well. I've gone with the clear heat shrink over the enclosed white zip tie with the little dipole. See how that goes. I can always swap over to a skew. And this disappointingly little small antenna for 2.4, hopefully that'll be okay. I've already set my channel up. There is a slightly enlarged hole here which just lets you get to the little button to change channels and things on the VTX. It is a bit of a tricky VTX in terms that it's got a couple of LEDs that flash. Well, no, a couple of LEDs that light up, in fact, and you kind of have to read that in binary to work out where you are, and so it's not brilliant. And of course, it's blocked through here, so it's hopefully I won't have to change channels too much. But oh, the only other thing I didn't do is I really don't like these battery straps, so I've gone with the more traditional battery strap. And I'm always going to like these ones over the others because you can tighten and do up. And of course I've got a bit of scratchy Velcro there to help hold the batteries on. In BetaFlight, all I did was, it was already on 317 running on Omnibus, so I increased my Super 8s to 0.8. I set up my OSD as I wanted it and I put my modes in. I'd actually redone all my modes to avoid channel 6 as this was supposed to switch channels on the VTX, but obviously that's not working. But you know, it's left as is. I'm using aux1 and aux3 now, but not aux2. The only other change I did was set small angle to 180. I generally always do this with underslung quads because when you have a battery on, like so, they don't generally stand up that straight and you're forever trying to straighten them in the right angle so they'll arm. So it's much easier just to have it, well, arm any way you want and get it. Other people have also remarked, of course, that if you get stuck in a tree, and you want to arm it to try and twiddle yourself out, it won't be able to on the standard arming, which is about 20 degrees, which is quite narrow really for rearming. But there you go, next thing to do is to fly it. So let's hope for some decent weather and see how this does, because I think I'll go straight to the field. We're not trying any of this garden hover nonsense, let's just go for it and see what happens. So here we are at the field, and I just did a very quick line of sight hover just to make sure things would work. Will it go up? Will it go down? Do the props move in the right directions? Yep, that all seemed good, so that was enough for me. Let's land it and get on with the FPV stuff. Now FPV wise, I'd made a mistake. I put it and armed it on the ground, and then I flicked it into air mode and it disarmed. So I'd made some mess up there. So this first flight in acro was done pretty gingerly, just to make sure I didn't put the throttle down too much as I'd normally do with doing any manoeuvre. So any little flips or rolls like this were done with a bit of throttle, being very careful. Fortunately, Daryl turned up and he had his laptop with him, so I was able to correct the air mode cock up I'd done, and I was able to fly it normally on the second battery. Now I should explain that us guys in the UK are going to be pretty much to either rain or this perpetual greyness that we tend to get for about 8 months of the year, which is really terrible for cameras. So fortunately we've got a reasonably good camera here that's able to handle conditions. Now a little bit of a scare here, if you notice we're going along and then suddenly it jerks back. That's because it actually went into a stage 1 failsafe there. So it carried on its direction, and that jerk you saw was I'd already been moving my fingers before it actually resumed the signal and caught up. So that was a little bit of a scare from the receiver, which I was worried about at the start. So what else can I say about this? Well, it seems lovely and powerful, and it felt very light, which made it really floaty, to such a point where I wasn't actually quite getting it right in terms of getting all the power down in a forward motion. So I'd put more power on. These are pretty sort of high angle props, so as soon as you get that power on, it really wants to go up rather than go faster. So I still need to play around with the camera angle a bit. I also, and this is maybe part of it, but I thought there was something different about the way the camera works. It almost seemed like there was distortion in one direction that I wasn't used to. So I'd go up and I'd kind of float upside down thinking, oh, I've got ages here. And then as I turned out of the inversion, the ground would suddenly be a lot closer than I thought. And I was wondering if the sort of distortion vertically was having an effect there. I don't necessarily think it's a problem. I think it's, again, maybe a little bit of setup, maybe a little bit of getting used to do it. But aside from that, I was getting pretty good image from this camera, and certainly it's not doing bad at all, bearing in mind it's just on a linear FPV antenna here. So the only changes I made in BetaFlight here was my super rates, which are at 0.8. Everything else is stock, and it's flying very nicely and very smoothly out the box. I did find it was a little bit, and this is perhaps because of the pitch of the props, it was a little bit sensitive on throttle, making me think I need a little bit of throttle expo to really bring this under control a bit more. It wasn't quite keeping the altitude that I wanted some of the time. But the big problem here was really revealed in this receiver. As I'm flying along here, and I thought I'll go up, I'll do a big inversion, see how long I can float for, and boom, it's disarmed. And that's because it basically hit failsafe, which is a problem. Fortunately, that didn't do any damage. These props are pretty tough. Nothing actually seemed to happen. But of course, as I got to LiPo 3, I was a little bit nervous about really getting any sort of distance, because that was only sort of 100-ish meters out. But here's a bit of a full throttle punch out, and you can see it really does climb quite nicely, and it wants to float around. But really quite happy with this camera, aside from understanding how the distortions work. Although it was a really horrible day for lighting and cameras really struggling this, I was able to pick up the little dot of another quad here and give it a little chase around, although it's certainly not the smoothest chase ever. It does fly differently than my other quads, and I think I need to put quite a few more batteries through it to really understand the way it performs and just do some little bits of tuning
to get it smoother and the way I like it. Though it feels like we need more up angle on the camera to go fast, it was still tricky to bring into land even as it is here, like catching the grass.
So in conclusion then, a little bit of a shame because it was so close to being great, but a couple of fundamental issues. Obviously out of the box it didn't work because of the receiver and the VTX issue about that shared S-bus connection. Obviously I'll follow up there and find out what the issue is. Because of that I took a look at another review. Andy RC reviewed this a couple of months ago. It's not a super new thing. He didn't have this problem, but I did notice that since that time it looks like the components had slightly changed, so that might be it. Obviously if you've got one recently, preferably on FreeSky, and it works or it doesn't work, then let me know and I can at least build up a picture and other people can as well. Obviously the other big problem was this little tiny receiver in here which just didn't work well enough. It's a real shame because the rest of the components used on this quad are really nice. These motors seem good, the camera's good, all the stack is pretty nice. And it's got real potential to go very fast, and of course when you go very fast you go very far away quickly. So I was having to rein it right in because I was so scared of it just falling out of the sky. So really I wasn't able to really let loose and just see what it could do. So what this needs in it, as far as FreeSky goes, is something like the XM Plus. That will go quite happily at the back even if it won't fit under there. There's room to put it in and it's not really a problem. So if you were looking at this one, I would suggest the plug and fly rather than the bind and fly, so you can put a receiver in of your own choice which you know will have the range. But I will be following up on this because I want to get this camera angle right so I can get maximum speed without it going up, which I think is going to be pointing quite far forward. And just getting to grips with the distortion this holds, and of course getting the expo right on the throttle, just make sure I've got this under control. At the same time I'll also be putting the skew there. This didn't do bad, but there was some breakup where I didn't want it, but I'll get some RPSMA skews to get on here. And of course I'll be putting an XM Plus in before I do anything else with it, because this I think really has potential. I love the fact it is so light and floaty, but I really want to let loose with it, and for that I need a proper receiver and a bit of time to mess around with it. You'll also notice I didn't do any HD footage in that, and that's because it is so light, so I felt it's doing it a little bit of a disservice by shoving like a 100-gram block on that. But it certainly will take a GoPro session or something like a Mobius or something like that. So I might put one on there when next time I follow up. So this came and was supplied for review by Gearbest. Thanks very much to them. If you're interested in one, please take a look at the links down below, and I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.